you'd think the American right would be happy at the moment. They've got the presidency, they've got the Senate, they've got the House of Representatives, at least until later in the year. And in many respects, they have the Supreme Court too. But they are worried about their future. And part of that worry is about the direction of the party, in particular, the direction it is being taken by some online influencers, chief among them, Tucker Carlson. Today's edition is largely about him. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it's Anthony in the American headquarters of Americast in Washington, D.C.
And we're going to talk about Tucker Carlson largely today, Anthony, simply because he is such an interesting case study. He's an interesting person in himself, but he's also interesting, isn't he, because he brings to our mind the kind of broader trajectory of the American right in the last, I don't know, couple of decades, but particularly, I suppose, the last decade or so.
Yeah, the evolution of Tucker Carlson from kind of an establishment conservative in the George W. Bush wing of the Republican Party to this populist rabble-rouser who moved closer to the right, the populist right with Donald Trump, but has had his differences with him as well. It really does tell us a lot about where the Republican Party, where the conservative movement is in America over the past 2 decades.
Yeah, and we've got a writer who's going to come on and talk to us. I've been talking to him. Jason Zengerle is his name. He's a contributing writer at The New Yorker. He's just written a book about Tucker Carlson. And I just wonder the extent to which with Tucker, he actually means the stuff that he says, or the extent to which it's just part of a shtick. I mean, I got a friend, for instance, Anthony, who buys his chewing tobacco, which I think is quite profitable for him. He's got this sort of chewing tobacco sideline and all these things. You know, he's a huge presence on the right and makes money out of it. And he wouldn't hide that at all. He'd be perfectly happy to say, yeah, he makes a fair living. But is this all about the living, or is it actually genuinely? Is he trying to change America, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah, and if you look at his background, he grew up in incredible wealth. He is born into the family that made all of its money in Swanson's food, frozen food, and he went to prep schools, Ivy League prep schools. He is a child of privilege, and then to be this kind of rabble-rousing populist now, it is, as you say, quite a journey. It has led a lot of people to say that this is it's insincere. And actually, we got a little window into Tucker Carlson and what he was saying when he wasn't on camera in those lawsuits that were brought against Fox News after the 2020 election, the defamation lawsuits brought by voting companies. And you could see Tucker Carlson kind of bluntly say he didn't like Donald Trump, had some real criticisms of Donald Trump, seemed to be a little bit more like the Tucker Carlson we saw earlier in his career. So, you know, take that as a data point that maybe some of this is an act, although I mean, if it's an act, he's been sticking with it for quite some time now, and he's been very effective, very compelling as a speaker. He's very popular because of what he's saying, and he's developed quite a movement even after he left Fox News, when people thought he would, his audience would wither away. He has successfully managed to continue to have a platform, a very visible platform for advancing his political views.
And he can mix it with politicians and do so in quite a compelling way. There's an interview, in fact, we should hear a bit of it, this interview with Ted Cruz. So Ted Cruz, who may well be a presidential candidate at the end of this administration, Republican, Texas senator, who supports regime change in Iran. And this is what Tucker did to him.
How many people live in Iran, by the way? I don't know the population. At all? No, I don't know the population. You don't know the population of the country you seek to topple?
How many people live in Iran?
92 million.
Okay. Yeah.
How could you not know that?
And the point there, Anthony, is when you look back at the Iraq War, which both of us remember from the American perspective, and I was doing Sarah's job during that time, and you think of the ignorance that there was about the ethnic makeup of Iraq, and the way in which they just thought, oh, this will be fine, we'll just blast through, and they like freedom like everyone else, etc., etc. And just before we hear the interview that I've done with this guy who's written a book about him, when we say he matters in the Republican Party and on the broader American right, that is true, isn't it? Because you could think, well, he's just one man. I mean, he's literally one man. And he's got his own platform now. And I'm going to talk a bit about that with Jason Zengerle, how he got to be where he is now. But where he is now does matter. There's no doubt about that, is
there? Definitely. And I think, his name has been bandied about as a potential presidential candidate in 2028 because of the base that he has developed, independent of Donald Trump, the following that he has developed. We've had these conversations before about Marjorie Taylor Greene and other members of the Trump movement and whether the movement, the MAGA movement, after Trump invariably, inevitably exits the scene. Carlson is one of those names that comes up, and one of those people who has kind of positioned himself to claim that mantle as the true MAGA, the real MAGA, the philosophical heir to Trumpism, and so I think he's definitely, and I'm glad we're doing a show on this, definitely someone that is worth understanding and understanding where he comes from, because he's youngish, he's not going away, he's going to have a role in the conservative world after Donald Trump exits stage left.
So without further ado, let's hear the interview we've promised that I did earlier with Jason Zengerle. So Jason, first of all, thanks a lot for coming on and talking to us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
And second of all, why are we talking about Tucker Carlson? Why have you written a book about him? Why does he matter so much?
Well, the thing that Tucker, and he did this at Fox too, he's doing this still, he's very good at taking fringe ideas that exist on the far right, oftentimes, on the internet, taking those ideas and smuggling them into the mainstream and presenting them in such a way he makes them more palatable. They're still extreme, but he presents them in such a way that they seem a little bit less extreme. I mean, the most sort of famous instance of this is the Great Replacement theory, this idea that elites, oftentimes Jews, are bringing immigrants into the United States to replace white voters and therefore support the Democratic Party. I mean, this is a theory that has been bumping around on the far right for decades. When Tucker was at Fox, he started putting it on his air, and he would do it in such a way that it didn't seem as crazy and as offensive as it clearly is. And I think that's now become a mainstream conservative view in a lot of instances, and he has done that a number of times. He's able to take these ideas and oftentimes conspiracy theories and even just news stories and put them in front of mainstream conservative audiences and get them to agree with them, and that is something that other people are not doing.
And he came to prominence, didn't he, on CNN? I mean, I can remember I was based in Washington, D.C. in the early part of the century, and I remember him almost as a slightly rather cuddly figure, entertaining figure on CNN.
Yeah, he recognized pretty early, earlier than a lot of people, including myself, that print was going to be not going to have the greatest future. And he, the one of the through lines throughout his career is, I think he very much wants status, he wants fame, he wants power. He wants money, and I think he realized that he wasn't going to be able to achieve that in print journalism, and so he went to cable news, and he went to CNN originally, and he was the host, one of the hosts of Crossfire, which was the venerable CNN debate show. There's a host on the left and a host on the right. He was on the right, and he did that for a number of years. And, he was, he sort of had this kind of preppy air about him. He always wore a bow tie, and he had, a prep school haircut. And he was very much kind of reflecting the conservative mainstream, the Republican establishment. He would hit those talking points on that show. And that's how that show worked. You need the host on the right needed to be a mouthpiece, basically, for conservatives, for Republicans. And Tucker did that job well.
There was a moment, though, wasn't there, when a certain late night host was the guest on Crossfire. And tell us about it.
Yeah, there's a whole alternative history if Jon Stewart isn't a guest on Crossfire, I guess. But Jon Stewart, who at the time was the host of The Daily Show, which was a very popular satirical news program in the U.S., he was a very big critic of Crossfire and of cable news in general. And this is after the U.S. has gone to war in Iraq. There's a lot of public backlash against the way the media handled that, the way they reported it, the way they talked about how Iraq had WMDs. So Jon Stewart becomes probably the most prominent critic of cable news, and Crossfire wanted him to come on their show, and they thought that he would be part of the act. And Tucker Carlson was actually friendly with Stewart. They used to share cigarette breaks outside of a studio, so like they knew each other. But when Stewart came on the show, he wasn't pretending, he wasn't playing. He gave his critique of Crossfire, but he did it in such a personal and just kind of harsh way, and crossed lines that people didn't usually cross on that show, that it really shocked, I think, the Crossfire producers, the Crossfire hosts. And Tucker tried to debate him, and Stewart just eviscerated him. I mean, it was just public humiliation, and the humiliation was compounded when a couple months later, the president of CNN canceled Crossfire and said, I'm canceling it because I agree with Jon Stewart's critique of it. I mean, Jon Stewart said, "You're hurting America." And the CNN president said he agreed with that, canceled Crossfire, let Tucker Carlson's contract run out. And it was sort of a personal and professional humiliation. It's funny, I mentioned the bow tie. Like, he stopped wearing a bow tie after that, I think, to try to, sort of change his image. But people still see him with a bow tie. I think one thing it really did, though, was it planted a seed of resentment, I think, that he felt towards, that club that he was a member of and that he was a part of, the sort of the clubby DC, political and media elite crowd. I think Tucker felt that they didn't defend him and support him as much as he would have liked. And I think that made it a lot easier for him, a decade later, when bashing the political and media elite became a successful, political and media strategy, made it easier for him to join in on that.
It's a really interesting one, that, isn't it? A lot of people who rail against elites in the United States, and I've heard Jon Stewart actually say this, a lot of them have been dissed, they feel, by those elites, that they haven't been. And you could almost say this about Donald Trump as well, actually. They've wanted to be part of an elite, and the elite has rejected them, and their anger knows no bounds because of the rejection. Is that too much of a psychotherapy session, or is that, do you think, true?
No, I think you're onto something. I think the same thing you can say about J.D. Vance. There is like a genuine resentment there towards these people. There are reasons for the resentment. I think in Tucker's case, the Stewart debacle kind of sent his career into a tailspin, and I think he struggled for a while after that. And I think that he felt that, the TV executives weren't really sort of appreciating his talents.
And you say he struggled for a bit, and then he goes to Fox, and Fox really makes him, doesn't he? He becomes a very big noise on Fox.
But not immediately.
Audience. Not immediately,
not
right.
immediately.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Why not immediately? Does he feel that he has to go somewhere to get that audience?
Yeah, so he goes to Fox, and he's like a third tier pundit there, and he's hosting the weekend morning show, and which is, not even like, doesn't even really do politics. And it isn't really until Donald Trump comes along that Tucker's star starts to ascend. And I mean, the reason for that is because at the same time he was, doing the Fox morning show on weekends, he was also editing a website and a conservative website called the Daily Caller. And through that website, I think he gained a real appreciation and understanding of what conservative voters wanted, because he saw what articles they clicked on. And so when Donald Trump ran for president for the first time in 2015, most conservative pundits just dismissed him. They didn't think he was a serious candidate. I mean, one, because he was Donald Trump, but two, just the messages he was focusing on, especially like, a nativist message, anti-immigrant, focusing on white grievance. Most Republicans at that time did not think that was going to be a successful campaign strategy. After Mitt Romney lost to Obama in 2012, Republicans thought they had to moderate on immigration. They had to be more
it was going to be Jeb Bush,
issues.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. The Jeb Bush campaign was the establishment thinking. And Tucker, because of the Daily Caller site, he understood that, what the Republicans establishment thought voters wanted and what voters actually wanted, there was a great gap, and he recognized that Trump was gonna have a lane in a Republican Party, and Fox had this like basic TV problem. Most of their pundits were dismissing Trump or criticizing him, and they needed to produce segments on Trump where you would actually have, a debate about him, like a pro and a con.
Yeah.
And Tucker was one of the few Fox pundits who wouldn't bash Trump, so he started getting more airtime because he would, just because he could, fill out a debate show basically, and that eventually led to him getting his own show.
In the old days, and I'm talking 10 years ago, you lose your place on television, that's it. You're back to writing or whatever, which you very modestly say you've stayed in and you don't have the power. But basically, if you lose your spot on television, it's a really big deal. What is fascinating, I think, about Tucker Carlson is that, in a sense, his huge salience has come since the Fox gig, and that is extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he was important. He was important at Fox too. I mean, he was the highest rated cable show, I think, in history. But he didn't go away. I mean, he went away, I think, in the eyes of a lot of liberal Americans. When he was on Fox, they paid attention to him, in part because he was showing up, in their Twitter feed every morning because people would post clips and it was sort of outrage bait. I think when he got fired from Fox, like in blue America's mind, he kind of disappeared, but his conservative audience didn't stop paying attention to him. And he, his timing was very fortuitous in a way. Like, I'm sure he hated it at the time. His firing was fortuitous for him. I'm sure he didn't like it at the time, but the timing was good because, cable news is kind of a dying industry here, the way print once was. And all of the energy now is in this streaming sector, and Tucker was able to enter that at just the right moment. Elon Musk had just purchased Twitter and was turning it into X and was able to boost Tucker's program on that. And conservative viewers were going to that space. They were looking for content there, and Tucker has now, he has a head start over anyone else from the Fox world, certainly, and from the cable news world in this space. And now you have Fox is now like buying back these podcasts, and they have licensing agreements, with people who left Fox, whether it was Tucker or Megyn Kelly. And it's just clear that that's kind of the future of this media space.
And with his new platform, he's done all sorts of things, and he actually goes to Moscow, doesn't he, for his own?
Yes, that was independent.
And he goes further, and he interviews, and this, I suppose, is the most notorious of the things that he's done since he left Fox. He interviews Nick Fuentes, this guy who is an admirer of Hitler, and he gives him a very soft interview.
Nick Fuentes, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I wanted to meet you. I've heard about you.
I've heard about you.
So, well, thank you. I want to understand what you believe, and I want to give you a chance in a minute to just lay it out.
What does that tell us now about what Tucker Carlson believes that he is, that the conservatives are, that his audience believes? What do you take from that?
I think it tells us a lot, because the backstory to that Fuentes interview, I think, is significant, because before Tucker had Fuentes on his show, they were actually in a feud. They were fighting each other. Tucker had criticized Fuentes on his show. He'd called him a Fed. He said that he thought Fuentes was sort of like a government-controlled provocateur who was out to discredit right-wing voices. He called him like a gay little kid who lives in his parents' basement. And Fuentes on his own show, returned fire and criticized Tucker for being a phony and someone who wasn't a real populist. And they were going back and forth, and Tucker was losing the fight. Fuentes's fans, they're called groypers. They're these, young, kind of disaffected men, conservative men. They were bashing Tucker on social media and supporting Fuentes. And so he had Fuentes on his show as like an olive branch, as a gesture, because he didn't want to lose Fuentes's audience. And Tucker, especially over the past decade, he has a very finely tuned professional and political radar. He seems to know where things are going. He skates to where the puck is going to be. And I think he thinks that that's where the energy is on the right now with the Fuentes people. And the fact that he thinks that, I mean, that's why he had Fuentes on, and that's why that was so significant.
Has he still got the ear of Donald Trump? Because they have semi-fallen out, haven't they? Particularly, you think of the Iran action that was taken, and also Tucker Carlson's view of Israel. To what extent is there still a relationship or not?
There's definitely still a relationship. I mean, he just last month he was at the White House on consecutive Fridays having lunch with Trump. I mean, they still talk. I think he's tight with Trump. He's even tighter with JD Vance. He clearly does not get his way every time. I mean, the Iran attack is a perfect example. Tucker was, quite vocal in his opposition to that in the run up to it. I think actually, in sort of gained some liberal fans during that. People, liberals who didn't want the U.S. to attack Iran. I think they liked Tucker for what he was saying. He is far more of a purist on foreign policy, on sort of an America first isolationist foreign policy than Donald Trump himself is. And I think they obviously have disagreements there. At the same time, I think Tucker, it's really important to him in a way that it was not when he was at Fox, that he is identified with Trump and that he maintains his access to and influence with Trump. So after the Venezuela operation, it was interesting. He criticized that. He was opposed to there being an operation before it happened. Then once it happened, he kind of backed off. He offered even his qualified support for it. So I think he's trying to play that game to make sure that he doesn't fall out of Trump's favor.
Could he run for office, do you think? Is he that serious?
I don't think that he has some, overwhelming desire to be president. It's not something that he's not Bill Clinton. He hasn't spent his life trying to achieve that. But I also think that he has an ideological project, and he has a vision for America that he wants to see achieved. And right now, he has a vehicle in JD Vance who is, in lockstep agreement with him on so many of these issues, and in a lot of ways, like, sort of takes his sort of political style from Tucker's political style.
What is his position within the conservative movement, in the sense that if you're on the left of the Republican Party, but that doesn't really exist anymore. If you're a more of a mainstream Republican and you want to bolster Israel's security, and you want to stand up to Russia, and you want to have low spending and low taxation in the United States. In other words, if you fit the bill of what you would have thought a Republican was a few years ago, does Tucker Carlson now have the power to keep you out for the long term?
That's an interesting question, because I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting about Tucker, and the reason I wanted to write about him is, once upon a time there were these institutions and there were these gatekeepers who could keep people out of the movement, and those have fallen by the wayside. Like, the guardrails are gone, which is kind of what has allowed Tucker to become more and more extreme and yet more and more influential at the same time. I do think that they're creating new institutions, maybe, and new guardrails. And yeah, I mean, it's not just Tucker keeping you out, it's just where the voters are and where the rank and file conservative, just conservatives are in the United States. I mean, what you sort of described as a mainstream conservative view, support of Israel, hawkish on Russia. I don't know if that's the mainstream conservative view anymore. I don't know what the mainstream is. Yeah, it's not. And especially among younger conservatives. And I think that's what is so interesting. I mean, right now, all of the outrage about Fuentes and all of this, sort of the controversy that caused, and the backlash it created, and the fissures that it revealed, so much of that has to do with, it's a debate about what American conservatism and what the MAGA movement is going to be after Donald Trump. Like, what does that become when Trump exits the stage? And that's what everybody's fighting about. And Tucker has, like, a distinct idea of what he wants it to be. And I think that, if I were betting on what it's going to be, I think Tucker's side will likely win that battle. But that's sort of what's in play right now. That's why there's so much tumult around it.
Real pleasure to talk to you about it. It's a fascinating thing, and it's something we keep going back to, obviously, because it matters so much, the way in which the kind of the platforms that people have are not the old platforms, are they? And that matters so much. It makes such a difference. And you've brought it all to life in your book. Thanks a lot for talking to us. There we are. That was my interview with Jason Zengerle. He was asked for a response, Anthony, to the book by the online publication The Wrap, and Tucker Carlson said this: "I didn't even know he'd finished it. I can't imagine anyone who'd buy it. I'm not that interesting." Okie dokie, that's it. Anthony, been a pleasure as ever. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Bye, y'all.
That's all for today. If you want to hear our other episodes, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts. For now, though, bye-bye.